I took my first vacation in a couple of years to finally get my own countryside house, but Karen decided that the house belonged to her daughter and demanded that I leave and give it to her for free. Of course, I refused, and then she attacked me with pepper spray, not knowing that I'm an FSB agent. Naturally, she didn't stop after that, but my patience isn't limitless. This story will shock you, but we promise it will be interesting. But before we start, please subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to shed light on the Karen issue, and it's important for us that as many people as possible hear these stories. Also, let us know where you're from and if you've ever encountered a Karen in real life. Thank you so much, and now let's begin. My name is Jason Harris. I work for the FBI and have finally decided to take a short vacation to change my surroundings. After several years spent in constant rush and tension, I bought myself a house in a quiet suburb. A few days ago, I moved in, hoping for peace and quiet. I had lived in noisy neighborhoods before, and now I wanted to take a break from the city bustle and focus on myself. I was ready to start a new chapter in my life. But on the very first evening after moving in, it became clear that suburban life wouldn't be as serene as I had hoped. As I was unpacking the last of my belongings, a loud and insistent knock sounded at the door. It wasn't just knocking. Whoever was outside clearly believed they had every right to enter. I set the box down on the floor, took a deep breath, and went to open the door. All I wanted was a bit of peace, but apparently trouble didn't take long to find me. Opening the door, I saw a middle-aged woman standing on the doorstep. She looked like someone who had made it her mission to control this neighborhood. A strict suit, a confident gaze, and a demeanor that spoke of her high status. There wasn't even a hint of friendliness on her face, and I immediately realized she hadn't come in peace. "You can't be in this house," she said in a tone that left no room for doubt. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Excuse me?" I was prepared for anything, but not this. "The house is occupied," she repeated, as if I should have already known. "I don't know who you are, but you need to leave," I smirked, slightly taken aback. "That's news to me," I replied, standing calmly in the doorway, "because according to my documents, this house belongs to me." She frowned. "That's impossible. My daughter was supposed to move in next month. This house was meant for her." I remained silent for a few seconds before asking, "Who promised you that?" "I did," she answered, with the clear conviction that her word was law. "I manage the HOA in this neighborhood. I decide who has the right to live here and who doesn't. This house wasn't supposed to be sold." I took a deep breath, already sensing this conversation wouldn't be an easy one. "I'm not affiliated with the HOA, and I don't care who you are," I said. "I bought this house fair and square, and I am its legal owner now." The woman hesitated, her gaze becoming even more insistent. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "I'm sure you don't want to cause any trouble. We all maintain order here. My daughter has been waiting for this house for months. I think it would be best if you just—" I cut her off, raising my hand. "Let's not drag this out," I said, calm but firm. "I don't care who your daughter is. I legally purchased this house, and I have no intention of leaving, so unless you have official grounds, I suggest you leave." Her expression changed, and she took a step back. She stood there in silence, studying me carefully, as if I were part of some kind of test and her next move depended on my reaction. I wasn't about to back down, but I also knew this situation required caution. After all, I was an FBI agent, and experience told me that a visit like this was no coincidence. "Karen, I understand that you run the HOA, but I'm not just going to walk away," I said, trying to keep my voice calm while making it clear that I wasn't giving in to her pressure. She relaxed slightly, but her expression remained unchanged. I noticed her gaze soften just a little, but she was still trying to maintain control of the situation. "I understand that this is unexpected for you, but no matter how you try to explain it, I have all the documents proving that I am the legal owner of this house." I paused, letting her realize that I wasn't going to back down. Karen tilted her head slightly to the side, but her gaze remained firm. "Do you really think your documents will help you in this neighborhood?" she said, her tone carrying the faintest hint of sarcasm. "We have rules here, and I follow them." "I'm not the kind of person who just gives up," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Your rules don't override the law." Karen took a deep breath and turned to leave, But before closing the door, she glanced over her shoulder and added, "Time will tell, Jason. You shouldn't underestimate what I can do if you don't follow the local rules." She left, leaving me standing in the doorway. I thought that maybe there was more truth in her words than I wanted to admit, but I couldn't afford to dwell on it for too long. Staying calm didn't mean I would let someone dictate how I should live. The next morning, despite her threats, I decided to learn more about the HOA Karen had mentioned. Someone in this neighborhood had to know who I was dealing with. I headed to the local HOA office, hoping for a more candid conversation with someone who could shed some light on what was really going on. When I walked in, I was greeted by a woman at the front desk. She smiled, and I immediately felt that she wasn't the type of person who liked to cause problems. "How can I help you?" she asked with a hint of curiosity in her voice. "I'm new here," I started, offering a slight smile, "and I'd like to learn more about the neighborhood and its rules." She nodded and asked me to wait a few minutes. When she returned, she seemed a bit tense. "If you want to talk about the HOA, I can tell you the basics, but there's something in this neighborhood that you shouldn't ask about too often." "What exactly?" I couldn't hide my curiosity. She glanced around as if deciding whether to continue. Then she sighed and lowered her voice slightly. "It's Karen. She controls everything here, and anyone who tries to stand against her ends up with problems." I nodded, realizing that something was definitely off. This was the moment when everything started making a little more sense, and while I wasn't planning to get involved right away, I knew Karen wasn't as simple as she seemed. The next day, just as I was unpacking the last boxes and settling into the house, there was a persistent knock at the door again. This time I wasn't surprised. I knew who it was. All I hoped for was that Karen wouldn't be too pushy, but as expected, she was once again standing on my doorstep with the same confident and even slightly smug expression on her face. "Good afternoon, Jason," she said, as if we had known each other for a long time, her voice sounding almost friendly. "I spoke with the HOA's lawyer. He confirmed that this house was sold by mistake. I think it would be best if you left after all." I looked at her without bothering to hide the fact that her words meant nothing to me. "By mistake?" I repeated with slight sarcasm, unable to conceal my irritation. "Do you actually believe that, Karen? Because I, for one, don't see any mistake here." Her face paled for a moment, but she quickly composed herself and continued. "I understand that this might be unpleasant for you to hear, but the fact remains. This house was never supposed to be sold. Our lawyer agrees on that. You wouldn't want to get into trouble, would you? This could turn into a very long legal process." I watched her closely. There was no real confidence in her words, and her expression was more tense than usual. Karen was clearly trying to use legal pressure, but something about her demeanor told me she wasn't entirely sure of her own position. "Listen, Karen," I said, not hiding my irritation. "I got this house fair and square, and that's not your problem. I'm not leaving. If you think you can force me out with some so-called mistake, then you're mistaken." Her gaze grew even sharper, and she stepped closer as if trying to impose her will on me. I saw her fingers tighten around her purse, a sign that she wasn't used to being confronted so directly. "You'll regret not listening to me," she said quietly but firmly. "I'm warning you, Jason. We all keep order around here. This neighborhood isn't for you." I decided not to waste any more time on empty conversations. "The only one causing disorder here is you," I said, standing firmly in the doorway. "I bought this house legally, and the only thing you can do is complain to whoever you want. But you're not going to get what you want." Karen stood silently for a few more seconds, clearly searching for a way to gain the upper hand. But when she saw that I wasn't backing down, she finally took a step back. "All right," she said, retreating. "I hope you understand that there will be consequences. We'll be seeing each other again." She turned and walked away, leaving me standing at the door, thinking that her attempts to intimidate me had failed. But I was certain she wasn't done yet and that this wouldn't be the last time she tried to push me out. By evening, just when I thought the day was over, there was another persistent knock at the gate. I looked out the window and saw a small group of people approaching my house. Among them was Karen, looking confident and determined. She was leading the neighbors, most of whom looked uncertain and hesitant, yet they still followed her. Karen clearly knew how to persuade people. I opened the door and immediately felt the tension hanging in the air. "Jason," she began as soon as I appeared on the doorstep, "you left me no choice. I can't allow you to stay in this house. These people support me, and I'm sure they'll help me convince you." The crowd stood slightly behind her, and I noticed that they weren't entirely sure about what they were doing. Their faces showed more confusion than determination. However, Karen didn't seem to notice and continued. "You broke the rules of this neighborhood. You don't deserve to live here. It would be better if you left on your own. Then there won't be any problems." I replied calmly, "This is my house, Karen, and I have all the documents to prove it. So if you want to keep arguing, I'll have to ask you to leave." Her face grew more tense and her gaze became sharper. It seemed she hadn't expected me to stand my ground so firmly. "I told you, Jason," she said, clenching her fists. "I won't stand by while someone disrupts order. If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll be forced to take action." Suddenly, her hand slipped out of her bag, and I noticed her pulling out a can of pepper spray. My body reacted instantly. I had been trained to handle situations like this quickly and efficiently. I stepped forward and grabbed her wrist, stopping her before she could strike. "Not so fast, Karen," I said firmly, making no effort to hide my irritation. "You have no right to threaten me." Her eyes widened in surprise as I opened my jacket and pulled out my FBI badge from my pocket. I held it up for everyone to see. "You have two choices. You leave immediately, or I arrest you for making threats and attempted assault. I can do it, Karen, and I will if you keep this up." The crowd around us stepped back, as if only now realizing how serious the situation had become. People began whispering among themselves. Some tried to retreat, while others just stood frozen, unsure how to react. Karen was furious, but seeing that her manipulation wasn't working anymore, she fell silent. Her hand, still clutching the pepper spray, dropped to her side. "This isn't over, Jason," she said, glaring at me with hatred. "I won't let this go." But I didn't let her continue. I wasn't going to stand there listening to her threats. "You can keep all your threats to yourself," I said calmly. "I won't be playing along with your manipulations. Get out of here and don't come back, or the consequences will be far worse than you think." Seeing Karen lose, the crowd began to disperse. People gradually walked away, casting doubtful glances at her. She stood frozen in place, no longer confident in her victory. After a moment, she took a step back, turned around, and left without another word. When she disappeared into the darkness, I shut the gate and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. I didn't know what had just begun, but one thing was clear. Karen wouldn't give up so easily, and this was likely only the beginning of what I'd have to deal with. The morning didn't start the way I had expected. I woke up, stretched, and headed to the bathroom. But as soon as I tried to turn on the light, I realized something was wrong. No power. I went to the faucets, no water either. At first, I thought it was some sort of accident, but when I tried to plug something into the outlets and got the same result, I realized the problem was much more serious. I went to the mailbox hoping for some explanation. Inside was an envelope from the HOA. I opened it and began reading, my irritation growing with every line. "Dear Mr. Harris, the HOA of the district has decided that your stay in this house is illegal, as you have not gone through all the necessary procedures with us. As a result, we have disconnected all utilities in your home. We strongly recommend that you leave the property to avoid further sanctions." Were they really this confident in their impunity? I quickly grabbed my phone and called the utility services. "Good afternoon, this is Jason Harris. My electricity and water have been shut off. I'd like to understand what's going on." The operator listened to me and responded, "Sorry, Mr. Harris, but we haven't received any instructions from the HOA to disconnect your services. We have no information about who might have initiated the disconnection. We will send a technician to restore the services immediately." I was surprised. The HOA didn't have the right to disconnect utilities, but somehow it had happened. I felt like I was just being used as a target in some game. "Okay, have the technician come as soon as possible," I said, hanging up. While I was waiting, I decided to call Max. He wasn't just a friend. He was the sheriff of this district, and since Karen had been getting too bold, I knew he'd be able to give me the support I needed. "Hey, Max, I've got a problem with a neighbor, actually. A neighbor woman," I said, explaining the situation. The sheriff listened to me and, not wasting any time, responded, "Listen, Jay, this has gone too far. If she tries anything again, I'll arrest her for exceeding her authority. She needs to understand that she can't mess with this stuff. I know her reputation. Don't worry, if you need help, I've got your back." I thanked him and hung up. At that moment, it became clear to me that Karen wasn't going to stop here. She clearly thought she could make all the decisions for everyone. The next evening, I was standing at the door, watching as the tow truck hooked up my car. Karen stood beside it with a smug look, clearly thinking victory was just around the corner. I stepped outside, walking confidently toward the tow truck. "Hey!" I called to the driver, and he immediately stopped the truck. "Are you really planning to tow my car?" Karen noticed me but didn't back off. Instead, she took a step forward and answered for the driver. "Of course we're towing it. It's parked incorrectly, and I think it needs to be towed. These are the rules in our neighborhood." I could feel my anger rising, but I stayed calm. I needed to figure out what was going on. I don't live in this neighborhood, and you're not the one to decide where people park. What, are you the owner of the block? I said, not hiding my irritation. As usual, Karen tried to keep her composure, but I could see her confidence starting to crack. "You don't understand. There are rules in this neighborhood, and they apply to everyone. You clearly don't know that this is HOA territory, and I manage the HOA. Your car is parked illegally." I sighed and crossed my arms. I didn't want to get into a long argument, but I couldn't let her unjustly take my car. "Karen," I said calmly but firmly, "you can't just decide what happens with my car. You have no grounds to tow it. Do you even realize what you're saying right now?" She paused, trying to find an answer that would support her false confidence. "I said it's parked wrong, and this is my neighborhood. I decide who's parked here and who isn't." "Do you really think I'm scared by your words? You just work for the HOA, but you have no right to take such actions, and you know that well." I paused, letting her understand that it wouldn't be easy to get out of this. At that moment, the tow truck driver, sensing the conversation was spiraling out of control, tried to continue his work. "Well, since you're so sure, why don't you show me just one document that proves you're right?" I said, almost mockingly. She tried to say something, but instead of words, her eyes started scanning me, looking for a loophole to justify her actions. I knew she had nothing. She was just trying to impose her own rule that had no legal standing. "No documents, huh?" I continued, not giving her a chance to defend herself. "Can you tell me on what grounds you think my car isn't allowed to be here?" Suddenly, I felt my patience starting to wear thin. She kept mumbling, but her words were just empty excuses. I took out my phone and dialed Max's number, not even looking at her. "Hey, Max, I need your help again. Karen's decided to tow my car for no reason. Can you come by?" Max responded a few seconds later. "Of course, Jay. I'm on my way. I'll be there in a couple of minutes." I put the phone on speaker, continuing to stand next to my car. Karen noticeably tensed up, her confidence starting to melt. She realized I wasn't going to back down. "Do you think Max is really going to help you?" she said with some irritation, but now a clear hint of doubt in her voice. I just smiled. "Max is my friend and the sheriff of this district. He won't tolerate you breaking the law, so you'd better wait for him, Karen." Karen silently stared at me, a flicker of fear appearing in her eyes. She wasn't prepared for her actions to be stopped at such a level. A few minutes later, Max pulled up in his patrol car. He got out, surveyed the situation carefully, and immediately approached us. "Karen," he said firmly, "show me the documents that prove you have the right to tow this car." Karen tried to protest, but her words were increasingly unconvincing. She was looking around as if trying to find a document, but of course there was nothing. Max noticed her uncertainty and sharply continued, "You have no documents. You can't tow the car without grounds. This is illegal." Karen started to panic, realizing her actions had no legal basis. "Karen," Max said, leaning on his authority, "you're under arrest for attempted theft and abuse of power. You acted without legal grounds and violated the rights of another citizen." Max took a step toward her, and without giving her a chance to respond, he handcuffed her. Karen fell silent, her confidence evaporating, and I stood there, feeling relief. Finally, she understood that her authority had no place here anymore. Max put her in the patrol car, and I watched as her attempts to manipulate the situation came to an end. Everything ended as it should, with the law on my side. I returned to the house, finally understanding that these problems were behind me. My vacation was ending, and I could calmly return to my work, knowing I wouldn't have to face Karen anymore. Thank you for watching. Please like and leave your comments. We hope this story impressed you.